I'm back. Did you miss me? Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, Eclectic Reads. Today I have two horror novels to talk about. I have not filmed for the last 2 months, but not because I haven't been reading, just because I haven't been filming. And many of the books I read were sort of mediocre, three and a half stars. But I finally read two books that are phenomenal. And although we're at the end of the spooky season, it is still dark out, very early, and as a result, I think that these books could still work for the winter season. In fact, I feel like reading spooky books this season, in addition to, of course, the fluffy Christmas books and wintry books that I will be talking about at the end of this video. But first, the two horror novels that I read and would highly recommend for people who are looking for historical horror. That is, books that really bring out the darkness of a historical time period and may or may not involve ghosts and other spooky things to bring out that horror. The first book that I read was The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. This book has been compared to Mexican Gothic. I have never read that book, and I'm not sure that I want to. But The Hacienda was amazing. I gave it 4.5 stars. So this novel takes place in the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence. Our protagonist is Beatriz, and Beatrice's father was killed by rebels because her father was seen as having been an ally to the emperor who had just been driven out of Mexico. Not only did she lose her father, but she also lost her entire inheritance. Her house was burned down. And so she and her mother had to live with her aunt and uncle, who were really unpleasant people. To get out of this situation, Beatriz decides to marry Rodolfo, who is a hacendado. So he is someone who owns the haciendas, these huge estates. This is Hacienda San Isidro. That is the building on the cover. She hopes that marrying Rodolfo will allow her to restore her family's fortune and reputation. San Isidro has done really well during the war, partially because Rodolfo was on the side of the revolutionaries, and partially because they have been growing maguey, which is agave, to produce alcohol. And of course, alcohol does well at any time, but especially when there is a tragedy or some kind of crisis, as during a revolution. Unfortunately, Beatrice's mother is not a fan of her marrying Rodolfo because he is the enemy, but Beatrice believes that if she fixes up San Isidro and makes it welcoming for her mother will come around to her side and support her daughter's decision. Well, unfortunately, San Isidro is not welcoming at all. It does not want Beatrice to be staying there, certainly not at night, and Beatrice ends up forging an alliance with a very unconventional priest named Father Andres to drive out the ghosts and other apparitions that are associated with this house. This is a haunted house story, and this is the book that I wish that that Shirley Jackson book was. I did not like the Shirley Jackson haunted house tale. What is that book called? I forget what it's called. I'll put it on the screen. That book was bored me out of my mind. I didn't see the point of it. Whereas this one really makes the house a character in its own right, and also shows the social inequalities in Mexico through this house. So like you really get a sense of the horror of this family through the house. And I thought it was so brilliantly done. There were so many times when I felt just a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not really scared when I read things, but if you're someone who gets scared of haunted houses, if any kind of creaks or anything in the middle of the night keep you up, this book will be phenomenal for you. I loved this book. I learned quite a bit about Mexico at this time period through this novel, and it was just so well executed. So, like I said, I gave it 4.5 stars. Then, what came to mind as another book that was gothic, this is Mexican Gothic, was another book that I had out from the library for a while, but just wasn't feeling ready to read. And then finally, I felt ready to read this book, and that was Kindred by Octavia Butler. Okay, this cover is hideous. I will put on the screen the cover that I actually prefer. This, in my opinion, is a gothic horror. Yes, there is a sci-fi element to it. This is the first Octavia Butler I've ever read, and certainly will not be my last. This story follows Dana, who is living in the 1970s. Now, this book came out in the 70s, so this is supposed to be like contemporary to when this book was published. She is a Black woman who is working to become an author. She hasn't really made it yet, and so she's taking a lot of temp positions. And she's married to a white man named Kevin, and Kevin actually has a best-selling book. They get married, and they have just moved into their house. They're in the what is going to be their library, when suddenly she is transported back to antebellum Maryland. Now, she doesn't know that at the time. She wakes up in a field and she sees a boy drowning. And naturally, she saves the boy. And that boy is Rufus. She comes to learn as she's talking to him and hearing him talk about Black people, she learns really quickly that she has arrived in Maryland during the time of slavery, and that Rufus's father is a slaveholder. Now, her first arrival in antebellum Maryland is short. She's only there for a little while, maybe a few hours. And Rufus's parents are not thrilled to see Dana, to put it mildly. Rufus despises his father. His father is abusive even towards his own child. And Dana hopes that, over time, she can try to get him to not be as cruel as his father. Thing is, she has to keep Rufus alive. And she is constantly transported back to this time period every time Rufus gets himself in trouble. And he increasingly gets himself in trouble. And Dana has to pretend to be a slave. And Kevin, who ends up also going back with her, pretends to be like her slaveholder. And it is dark. Whereas the brutality and darkness in this book is mostly like fantasy, there's the ghosts and all of that. The horror of this book is the history, is the lived experience of being an enslaved person. It is brutal. Like, there is the violence is visceral. That's why I think that calling this sci-fi doesn't feel right. Like, I feel like it's way more historical than sci-fi, and that, yes, it's gothic horror because it's horrifying. Like, this is such a raw look at what it was like to be an enslaved person. And Dana has this ethical, conundrum of, increasingly disliking Rufus, but also having to keep him alive because he is her ancestor and he has to have a child, otherwise she won't exist. So her whole existence relies on Rufus. It's brilliantly done. It is a very hard read, but I think it also, in an interesting way, goes well with this book because both of them shed light on the horrors of social dynamics at this time and just the history. I do think this does it slightly better, so I gave it 5 stars. I definitely will be reading more by Octavia Butler. After finishing those 2 books, you can imagine that I wanted to read something light and fluffy, so I am currently reading the most recent Mrs. Claus book by Liz Ireland, Mrs. Claus and the Very Vicious Valentine. This one takes place during Valentine's Day. We have our protagonist, April Claus. She married Santa Claus, Nick Claus in the first book in the series, because his brother, who was the Santa Claus, was murdered, and the first book deals with that. But now she is very well established in the North Pole, and of course we're dealing with another murder. But it's so much fun and so lighthearted. And even though it takes place during Valentine's Day, it's in the North Pole, so we have flying reindeer and snowmen and elves and all the other Christmassy stuff. So I'm really enjoying it so far, and I'm halfway through. Some other winter books that I want to read. include Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is supposed to be like a retelling, a fairy tale retelling, of Rumpelstiltskin, maybe? I'm not sure. I think so. I think so. And it, of course, involves a lot of snow and stuff. So I've seen this recommended on a lot of winter recommendation videos. I want to read this book. I don't think it's Christmassy, but I've never read a Terry Pratchett, so I got We Free Men, which is the first book in the Tiffany Aching series. I have been told this is a great place to start with Terry Pratchett, so I will be reading that. The first Agatha Christie I ever read, Hercule Poirot's Christmas, which I loved when I read it years ago, but I forgot the plot entirely, so I look forward to reading that this Christmas. The Christmas Murder Game, which is by Alexandra Benedict. This looks really fun. This is a mystery set during Christmas, and I'm just, wanting to read a lot of books that are light and wintry and Christmassy, and yeah, I think Spinning Silver might be darker just because it's an adult fairy tale retelling. I would imagine it's a little darker. I've got Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret by Benjamin Stevenson, which is the third book in this series. It is a wonderful mystery series following a protagonist who assumes that the reader is familiar with the norms of Golden Age mysteries and breaks the fourth wall a lot. It is really a lot of fun, and this one's super duper short, so I look forward to reading that. And the final book I want to mention is The Girl Who Saved Christmas by Matt Haig. I've read A Boy Called Christmas, and of course I forgot the plot because I forget plots all the time, a few years ago, but I do want to read this, and it's got some nice illustrations in here, some cute little illustrations to get me into the wintry spirit. So yes, I do recommend those horror books. I will be reading some horror. I do actually have It by Stephen King, which I've been wanting to read forever. And yes, I am aware of the scene. I am aware actually of the content of the book. And I think that in general, when it comes to horror, it is helpful, at least for me, to know what I'm getting myself into. But I have been meaning to read this book for a long time, and I do hope to get to it in winter. So let me know if you've read any of these books, and hopefully the horror novels that I recommended will be ones that you will try to pick up soon. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.